esteemed guests, and passionate advocates for climate change. Welcome to day one of Malaysian Support for COP30 event, a 10-day virtual journey held in conjunction with the UN Climate Change Conference in Belém, Brazil. Malaysia continues to take bold steps in driving climate leadership, empowering future generations, uplifting indigenous and marginalized communities, and embedding environmental stewardship into our national priorities. Through this collective effort, we strive for a more equitable and sustainable future where every voice contributes to the global fight against climate change. Over the next 10 days, we will be exploring key themes from ecosystems and adaptation to finance and the blue economy, highlighting how Malaysia is turning climate ambition into meaningful action. Additionally, you're welcome to visit our website to browse the daily themes. Today's theme, Safeguarding Our Ecosystems, highlights the vital role of nature in driving climate solutions. The sessions will explore how science, communities, and finance can work together to protect and restore ecosystems, from conserving Borneo's diversity to strengthening community resilience and unlocking new ways to value forests beyond carbon. Together, these discussions reinforce the urgency of preserving our natural environment as the foundation for a sustainable and resilient future. To kickstart our program, we begin with our conversation with Dr. Gary Theseira, Chair of the Council of Climate Governance Malaysia, together with Ms. Lakhsmi, Lavanya, Rama, Iyer, Director of Policy and Climate Change at WWF-Malaysia. Their discussion theme, Unpacking COP30, the call to restore our natural balance, will explore key outcomes from the COP30 biodiversity negotiations and connect them to Malaysia's own efforts in ecosystem restoration and conservation. Please join me in warmly welcoming Dr. Gary and Ms. Lakhsmi as they share their insights and reflections to open our day one conversation. Over to the both of you.
Thank you very much, Aaron. It's a very good morning, everyone. It's a very great pleasure to be able to speak with you this morning, even as we end the first day of the COP in Belém, Brazil. Of course, I have with me Lakhsmi Lavanya Ramaya, who has been a stalwart commentator on these issues for many years, given her role at the WWF, and we will delve into some of the issues surrounding the role of ecosystems and ecosystems contributions towards how we need to use ecosystems to restabilize the climate, and first and foremost, of course, to stop damaging ecosystems either intentionally or inadvertently. As we know, the COP takes place every year about this time, and it almost seems like yesterday when I was sitting here and we were looking at the last year's COP. But this 30th session of the meeting of the parties, which is described in short as the COP, takes place from the 10th to the 21st of November in Belém. And as I outlined before, it's not just one single meeting of the COP. We do have the meetings of the two subsidiary bodies, the 63rd meeting of the subsidiary body for scientific implementation, as well as this subsidiary body for the scientific and technological advice. Apart from that, we also have the meetings of the Kyoto Protocol, the 20th session of the parties to the Kyoto Protocol, and the session on the 7th session of the meeting of the parties to the Paris Agreement. So it's a collection of meetings that will go on over these 10 days or so. And they will, as usual, begin with an official level meeting during the first week, during which mostly the meetings will complete the work in the subsidiary bodies that will forward then documents to the supreme bodies. And if there are any unresolved issues, these will be probably taken up in the second week of the COP during what is known as the high-level segment. Now, prior to the initiation of the COP, from the 6th to the 7th of November, the Brazilian President, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, actually held what was called a Leaders Summit. This is not an uncommon occurrence for the presidency to precede the COP with a small group of select leaders to set the tone for the COP. And in this case, President Lula called on these leaders to do more for the planet and to reaffirm their commitment to climate multilateralism, the idea being to restore mutual trust and the spirit of collective mobilization at a time when globally we seem to be pulling in multiple directions, at least. The Brazilian presidency has, from the very start, I think, attempted to set the tone for the COP. And they've done, in my view, a good job of scene setting, given the fact that it's been 33 years since we agreed to establish the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. We are now at the 30th of the Supreme Body meetings, the UNFCCC meetings, and we've agreed now the Paris Agreement since 2015. So for the last 10 years, from 2015 to 2025, we've been refining and completing the work on the rules and modalities. And I believe we are at a serious turning point. In fact, the presidency has referred to this COP as the COP that turns the corner from predominantly being a negotiating body to being an implementation body. And of course, in doing so, the presidency has highlighted key areas, of course, that are impacting the global economy. Huge issues like food security, like energy transition, like social inequality, which is a global problem, not just between nations, but even within nations. And acting as an accelerant or a magnifier on all of these key issues is, of course, climate change. Very cross-cutting, very ubiquitous, and affecting climate and weather on a daily basis. Now, the presidency has also outlined key areas that it really wishes to focus greater attention on. This is apparent even as we see in the daily headlines that there continue to be huge extreme weather events ravaging parts of the world, from Central America, the Caribbean, to us where we are in Southeast Asia, and most notably in the typhoon belt. This year, there have been an inordinate number of typhoons and super typhoons, and with very dire consequences for countries in that belt. So we see that countries like Taiwan, like the Philippines, China, and Vietnam, and others actually suffering a great deal of damage from these. And this raises the importance of adaptation. In many ways, we realize that more needs to be done to reduce the loss and damage that we incur during these events. Of course, when you're dealing with typhoons, it's extremely difficult to withstand all of this energy, and it's going to be a long road and a long-term decision making that goes into this. All the same, and even more importantly, perhaps, adaptation is needed to protect the mitigation actions that many countries are expending a great deal of finance and budget on, and not just the public sectors, the private sectors of these countries as well, putting a lot of investment into net zero for their corporations. And all of these gains stand to be reversed and undone if there is inadequate adaptation to protect these. Even as we implement adaptation and mitigation, many countries are also looking at the just transition issue, because like many things, as we move away from our utilization of fossil fuels, there will be sectors that will need to downsize. And so all the people involved in these sectors, employed in these sectors, will need to be, as part of an adaptation plan, or perhaps of economic reformation plans, moved to growing sectors. And there are growing sectors as we undertake this transformation. Of course, one of the key sectors is the energy sector. There are a lot of people involved in the fossil fuel industry. These will necessarily need to be moved to some of the growing sectors in increasing electrification, in renewable energy, as part of a broader energy transition. We also note that as we see greater occurrence of extreme weather events throughout the world, that inordinately certain communities are impacted more than others, vulnerable communities. Among them, of course, are groups like women, like children, like refugees, people who might be in transit for some reason, undocumented people. All of these groups are actually impacted to a very high degree, and their lives are disrupted, their livelihoods are disrupted. And in terms of human dignity, we really need to understand where these problems are if we are going to address them in a comprehensive way. Now, one of the issues that is of course central to all of this, it's a central issue in every COP, and that's the issue of finance. And as we saw in last year's COP, developing countries estimated that to adequately address climate change, we would need upwards of $1.3 trillion per year. But unfortunately, what ended up being pledged to be mobilized was something only in the realm of $300 million. So all of these things, happening at the international conference right now, ongoing. I think it's the first night. It's around 8 p.m. over there in Belém. But as we move forward, a number of issues I think are going to be at the forefront. I was going to end with the issue that is of course a key issue for Brazil, and that is it's the issue of forests. It's not just a key issue for Brazil, but globally. We have recognized now that forests and natural ecosystems, and when I say forests, I'm speaking very, very broadly of all the categories of ecosystems in the various types of landscapes that could be regarded as forests, because forests range from what you see here in Malaysia, a very lush, very thick equatorial rainforests, all the way to savannas, even grasslands. And then we have things like the mixed hardwood forest, the boreal forests stretching up into the high latitudes or south, as the case may be. But ecosystems that serve as a backstop, continuing 24/7 to sequester large amounts of the greenhouse gases that we are putting into the atmosphere. Also of increasing significance and importance, the role of the oceans. Because photosynthesis, while it's very visible to us when it takes place on land, actually takes place to a much greater extent in the oceans. Because algae that live in oceans, and oceans cover almost 70% of the world, are huge undertakers of photosynthesis, and in doing so, they actually cause a diurnal fluctuation in the level, in the pH of the oceans. Essentially, during the daytime, the large amount of photosynthesis that occurs in the oceans results in CO2 in the water being actually removed by the algae, and this actually results in the seawater becoming more alkaline. And then every night, as respiration takes the place of photosynthesis and CO2 is released back into the oceans, the ocean acidity increases again. So even if we think of the annual fluctuation of CO2 due to terrestrial plants in the summer and winter, we actually see a 24-hour oscillation of ocean CO2 and ocean acidity due to the impact of microalgae and macroalgae as they photosynthesize and regulate the CO2 content and the acidity of the oceans. The presidency has also outlined some other areas that they're going to focus on, including something called the globally determined contribution. Of course, this is an analog of the NDC, or the nationally determined contribution, but the presidency, in a bold move, is taking a look at how all of the NDCs would actually stack up when it comes to what's needed in terms of a global contribution to try and bring us closer to net zero and reduce the impact of climate change. And to do this, they're putting forests at the heart of climate action and are proposing something called the Tropical Forests Forever Facility, or TFFF. And they're hoping that the BRICS countries, together with the UK and Norway, will be able to raise the amount that's needed, and the amount has been estimated at something like $4 billion US dollars a year, to try to ensure that this very, very important backstop for addressing climate change is not lost. There's also a call to strengthen the role of justice and inclusion in the climate diplomacy process. And in particular, now they're looking at empowering subnational governments, meaning the roles of state, districts, and local government, as they see that addressing climate is something that has to happen on the ground, in the way that people live their lives. So the concept of empowering the public, empowering small businesses, empowering civil society to play a more active role in the mainstream climate diplomacy movement is, I think, something that is gaining momentum. In doing so, the presidency has outlined a 6-pillar strategic agenda to try to bring climate change to the forefront. And among these, you will find things like transition, the idea of transitioning the energy supply, transitioning industry, transitioning the transportation networks, the concept of stewardship, taking care of our biodiversity, ensuring the health of our oceans, and, as I mentioned earlier, forests. They're focusing on some key transformations that will help to bring this about, in particularly with respect to food systems and agriculture. These need to be quite radically transformed in terms of their resource use, including water, fertilizer, chemicals, etc., and the networks that we utilize to distribute food that we produce. It's been often pointed out that it's not that we produce inadequate amounts of food, but the fact that where we produce the food isn't exactly where the food is needed. Also, in terms of the way we manage the processing of our food, the transportation of our food, the storage of our food, even all the way to retail of our food, while the imposition of the use-by dates, expiration dates for food is something that has helped us to improve our quality of life. It's also useful to note that almost 1/3 of the food in grocery stores actually gets too close to the expiration date to be sold, meaning that in terms of how we are managing the copious amounts of food that we produce, there is a great deal of wasted energy, wasted resources that ends up not going to people, but actually ending up in other uses as waste. So the idea is that these require key transformations. The presidency has also pointed out the need for improved resilience, even as we read these reports of extreme weather events ravaging our countries and our cities. Infrastructure, water supply, energy supply, infrastructure all needs to be strengthened in terms of resilience. The overarching idea being, of course, is that we are trying to improve our own economic and social development, improve our quality of life beyond just what the GDP numbers say, but to actually look at quality of life. The situation is dire enough that the presidency is trying to find what are called accelerators or enablers. And we have long pointed this out, that none of this can proceed without what we've called previously the enabling environment, which is the whole suite of human activities, structures, systems that could help us, but that in the past have actually been a part of contributing to the problem. But now that we need to harness and to adjust, to augment in ways that actually support us in the transition to low carbon, to net zero, and to a green economy. So these accelerators and these enablers are what the presidency is looking for to help this process out. So, of course, key in all of this will be things like the means of implementation that we've talked about for years and years as one of the key elements to the success of these multilateral processes, the three being finance, technology transfer, and capacity building. And then cutting across all of these things, of course, the key principles of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, acknowledging the fact that developed countries have used the atmospheric space in their development and in their enrichment, and now the developing countries need to improve their standard of living and their quality of life. There is really no atmospheric space remaining for all of these greenhouse gases that are the waste product of our current mode of development, what has been the current mode of our development for many decades now, the use of fossil fuels. And to do this, the presidency is calling for a shift from pledges to practice. And once again, and this is completely in line with what they've talked about at the very, very beginning, where previous COPs focused on negotiations, getting the rules and modalities, negotiating the treaties. This COP that is supposed to turn the corner is the COP that intends to move towards implementation. So enabling, accelerating implementation through finance, through technology transfer, through capacity building. And as usual, we have on the ground agencies and organizations that are following the COP very, very closely, and we are very, very grateful to have as a partner in this the Third World Network, and we have people on the ground there who have been, who will be for the next 10 days reporting on the progress of the COP. Of course, in the opening days, they looked at things like the adoption of the provisional agenda, the focus on key issues like adaptation, the national adaptation plans, the Just Transition Work Program, the mitigation work program, very, very prominently, given this year's extreme weather, the Warsaw International Mechanism on Loss and Damage. There is the dialogue on paragraph 97, the UAE dialogue to establish the outcomes of the global stocktake, the annual global stocktake dialogue. Then, of course, inexorably matters relating to finance. This includes, of course, matters relating to the adaptation fund, the implementation of the technology programs, and then, of course, the areas under Article 6. And these include both the agreement on carbon markets as well as those on non-carbon market approaches. And it looks like we're getting close to the 8:30 mark. So right now, I would like to welcome into the conversation a colleague who's been with WWF for many years and has been part of climate discussions for a long, long time, and is extremely well versed in all of these issues pertaining to ecosystem health. Ms. Lavanya Rama Iyer, welcome. It's always a pleasure to be able to speak with you. Of course, you've been with WWF for many years now, and it's always been nice when I've been at the COPs to be able to bump into you there. And after 14 COPs, at least on my side, I'm not sure how many it's been for you. We sometimes get the sense that some of the things that we've been advocating for have sort of had a great deal of difficulty getting traction. As we look at this COP that's supposed to turn the corner, how do you see the sort of renewed focus of the Brazilian presidency? What impacts do you see it having on what we have long acknowledged as a linchpin in ensuring that we do not have runaway climate change, natural ecosystems? Welcome. Could we have some of your thoughts on this issue?
Yeah. Well, first of all, good morning, Dr. Gary, and good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to this session and to get WWF Malaysia's views on this very important topic. Really, it's you have summarized very clearly, Gary, the main agendas that are that are going to be discussed very succinctly, and I mean, it's vast. You touched on everything under the sun, literally, right? And that is what climate change is all about, isn't it? It's about our own survival. In many instances, including in the recent ICJ declaratory decision.
Yes.
Climate change has been recognized as an existential crisis. And it is right, it is timely that the Brazilian presidency is connecting the disconnect, I think, that has been the root cause of the problem to begin with. Finally, kind of making that strong connection between the climate issue and nature. And this is a continuation, actually, a very welcome continuation from the CBD COP last year, COP16 in Colombia, which put a lot of focus on that too. So it's good that this trend is carrying on, and really what we need to see also is some kind of synergy between these efforts, because we cannot afford to see biodiversity, nature as one track, climate as another track, sustainable development as another track, trade as another track, food security as another track, when actually all of these things come under one abundant globe, planet Earth, Mother Earth, right? And who we rely on for food, for air, for water, for all the basic fundamentals. So it is really good that this focus is being made sharply in this COP. And it's one of the key areas, as you rightly mentioned, is on ecosystems, forests, and also the stewards, the traditional stewards and their rights. And so the other aspect of this COP that is really interesting is how it's drawing in a wider participatory approach, wider constituency to resolve this issue, because it needs the whole village, right? And the indigenous people's voices, so important, the stewards of our planet that have, with their wisdom and with their worldview, those traditional ways of approaching nature, being part of nature being an extension of self, rather than, unfortunately, what we have been doing in the more recent context of being at war with nature, literally, is what we need to embrace back again. So this COP is also bringing indigenous voices and voices of the communities really much more into the space of decision making, which is also a welcome thing. And embedding nature across, I think all conversations is important. It's not about energy transition in isolation, but energy transition needs to take into account what is going to happen to nature if we are, moving into, say, big solar farms, or having to access rare earth elements in nature from forests, or capture carbon and store it in reservoirs in the oceans. I mean, all these things have to be brought together in a comprehensive way. And so it's the hope that this COP is pushing that agenda strongly.
So we noticed that and I mentioned earlier that the presidency is focused on the ideas of justice and inclusion as part of this, and when we look at justice and inclusion, I think it's understood that even as you think about regulatory frameworks, as you think about legislative frameworks, for too long, there's been, sort of this disconnect. We have the lawmakers and the regulators, and they are the ones who put these things together. Unfortunately, in many situations, without consulting with all of the stakeholders, and as you rightly mentioned, I think it's time that we look at what has actually helped our natural ecosystems to survive and actually retain a great part of their resilience, and that is these areas that have actually been stewarded, and that's the correct word that you've used, by these communities, local communities and indigenous groups that have actually found ways to coexist with these natural ecosystems on the one hand, obtaining resources that they need for their survival, and on the other hand, also ensuring that the situation persists or continues, that actually helps these ecosystems to continue in perpetuity delivering these ecosystem services, enabling them to heal themselves if there are any extreme weather events and the like. And this nexus of legislation and ecosystems, I think, is a very important one as we begin to see extreme weather events that are quite unprecedented, actually moving in and quite in a way that we're quite unused to, impacting natural ecosystems. I mean, we're used to our fragile man-made ecosystems succumbing to the impacts of extreme weather events. We are also used to legislation that guides economic activities and human activities to prevent things like pollution, to prevent things like illegal disposal of toxic waste, etc. And to the extent that we've been able to enforce these regulations, we've been able to use legal frameworks to protect natural ecosystems. Is this something that we will need to consider regulations and legislation that actually begin to address the impacts of climate change on our natural ecosystems that we depend on for a lot of our very, very basic resources? What is WWF's take on this?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. That's a very important and very interesting and very complex question. Because as a society, or at least a modern society, we are used to seeing things in a very siloed manner. And we look at things as, individual rights to flourish, right?
Yeah.
At the cost of anything, because that is the primary purpose. And that's how, in fact, all our systems are built around, to enable that and to protect that, even the legal system, right? It's about proprietary rights. And, if you have the ability to say, I own this, then you suddenly have all kinds of rights over it, and you can even, disenfranchise others, right? So, but that is so far from the reality of how we actually exist. And that is why I raised this issue about the worldview and the wisdom of the indigenous peoples who innately understand that we are part of nature, not apart from nature. We are not waging a war against nature. We have to live in harmony with nature. We are interdependent. These are important words. And we have to embrace these words, because even the legal system has to operate in that manner. When it comes to, I'm sure you know about this, protecting the commons, there's really not much you can do. I mean, you have citizens' cases and that are taken up, but this law is sort of opening up and embracing the rights to do this. But it's still built. What I'm saying is the foundation is built on proprietary rights, right? So it is really important that we first change this paradigm. When we change the paradigm to say that actually we are all connected and interdependent, and ultimately our foundation for well-being is a functional ecosystem. If there is no functional ecosystem, nothing works. We won't have the fundamentals. And if we don't have the fundamentals, we as a society cannot thrive. If we as a society cannot thrive, there's no such thing as an economy, because that's a construct of society, right? So we have to get that order right first. Now, so I make that point very strongly. And now there is definitely an understanding that human rights is linked to the right to a clean, healthy, sustainable environment. You would know that, the UN declaration back in 2022, it was also adopted by Malaysia. And more recently, during Malaysia's chairmanship of ASEAN, last month, in fact, there was an ASEAN declaration on the right to a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, which is very encouraging, because this is where it shows that linkage between human rights, which is what's protected by the Constitution, which is what's also protected by the laws, and how how healthy the environment is, basically. Now,
No.
sorry, I do
Go
have.
ahead. Yeah, please continue.
There's another layer to this. So that is from a human context, right? And what we draw from nature. That's a good progression. But some countries, particularly in Latin America, have also recognized something called the right of nature to be nature, right? So it's not dependent on what human beings draw from nature, but really nature being able to just exist without being disturbed. And those provisions are incorporated into the Constitution. And I think that is what you are now touching on, right? Whether there's such a need across the world globe for such a thing. And perhaps that is what the ICJ declaratory advisory decision that I mentioned earlier, it's really quite a landmark decision, and instigated by the students.
Yes,
the Pacific Islands, because their existence was being threatened, and that had become taken up by the UN, and it became an issue that was raised to the International Court of Justice. And they said that states have a duty to protect, right? And part of that duty is also to redress any harm to ecosystems. Now, how that plays out ultimately depends on how we navigate through the things that I just mentioned. But ultimately, do we accord nature a right? Because ultimately we depend on nature functioning. Now, this might sound odd. This might sound crazy because, okay, if nature has a right, who's going to enforce that right, right? Mm-hmm. Well, we also have a construct called a company, a corporation. And that's a man-made construct, and we have companies given, the right of being a legal entity, and then rights accruing to companies accordingly. So it's not something that we cannot do if we put our minds to it. But I think we have to put our minds to this because this is an existential crisis, and then maybe that will take that complex. What was it? You mentioned globally determined contribution, right? Looking at it from a global scale, looking at it from a holistic scale. Maybe this is the kind of thing that we also need moving forward. Yeah. Thanks for the question, Gary.
Oh, no. I'm so glad I let you continue, because I think this is you and I know that if we could get going on this over a cup of coffee without any time constraints, we probably just keep sitting and talking forever. But I think you've touched on something very, very important. As the presidency has talked about moving from NDCs to the GDC, as you've talked about, the rights of nature per se, and the very interesting question about who enforces nature's rights. I'm kind of drawn to this idea that we frequently talk about an elephant in the room, not realizing that actually even when we try to think of the rights of nature, we need to start with something like the role of nature, and how we as a species, as a civilization, use nature in all of its distinct roles, and the idea, which is one step further, that is seldom acknowledged now, is that we are not in a room with the elephant. Okay, we are of nature. We are in, all part of this natural elephant, as it were. And so to try to separate our role from the role of nature would seem somewhat futile. And I come back to the idea that you raised, which is very important, like who enforces nature's rights? Well, nature enforces its own rights. When you change aspects of nature, when you alter the energy balance within systems, the systems respond in a completely natural way. And this is exactly what we are seeing with climate change. We understand how global climate systems work, how they are driven by the energy ultimately from the sun that all of us are thankfully using more and more of. But we also understand that the historic solar energy over millions of years that has been stored deep within the earth as chemical energy, and once again, that we in our quote unquote wisdom have brought up and used to advance our civilization, so to speak, have put us in this situation. So I mean, to solve this problem, it really appears to me that we have to re-understand our role within the system that systems that we create and the systems that we're operating in. In my experience, I think that these, if they've done nothing else, these multilateral environments have had some role in strengthening the appreciation and the awareness of the global community about this very, very, I would say almost mechanical linkage between what we do to the environment and how the environment is going to respond. Has it been enough? Do you think that people are still sort of waving their hands in the air saying, we don't understand why we're having all these extreme weather events? Or conversely, in your view, has this whole procession of COPs and CBD events actually contributed to a better, the general public globally having a better grasp of why this is happening and how what we are doing actually can and has both contributed to worsening the problem, and then in hindsight, looking at actually how much of our energy systems have changed so far, in particular in countries like Pakistan and countries like China, and then say, well, how much worse would we otherwise be if not for all this? Could you shed some light on where you think the balance is? Of course, we haven't done enough, and we could always do more. But where would you say we are in this?
Okay, that's a big one. So
Another big one.
Well, I guess let me see if I got you correctly here. You're asking where our level of understanding is on.
Well, how far back do we have to go to capture enough of the global population to help them with this awareness that how coupled we are with our environment actually demands this very fundamental change in how we understand the issues of governance and what this will take to actually help us turn the corner. Is this approach that the presidency is taking? How relevant is it, or are we going to end up sort of barking up the wrong trees again and going in circles again, rather than actually backing up far enough to capture the fundamentals that we need to change?
Okay, well, thanks, Gary. I think yes, 30 COPs, right? And
Yeah.
and actually we've come full circle in a way, because as you rightly pointed out, the Rio Convention started in Brazil, in Rio.
In Brazil.
And we are now here today, 30 COPs later, many years later. And it's now also known as the implementation COP, right? And so in the process of these 30 COPs, we have definitely seen a change of focus. So, you touched on this also, the importance of adaptation. Now, in the past, not much was said about adaptation. COPs, especially the climate COPs, were all about mitigation. But we are now seeing a better, a more balanced focus on that, right? And one of the key things that we want to, we are hoping for is a good outcome on the global goal on adaptation. sort of a 1.5 degree mitigation goal that was set, previously, a similar equivalent. We are also seeing a better understanding through these COPs that there is loss, there is damage that is a result of lack of, action on addressing climate change comprehensively. And when I say that, it's not just about ensuring that we don't continue spewing greenhouse gas emissions uncontrollably, but it's also to make sure that we are taking measures to adjust to the changing climate as we stabilize, as we seek to stabilize the climate in the future. So that mix of mitigation and adaptation is clearly important to reduce the third pillar, which is loss and damage, right?
Absolutely,
yeah. So that mix has to come, must be properly managed. And so far, unfortunately, we have seen too much of a focus on mitigation with not much results of that either. I mean, if the early focus had been successful, we would have to do less on adaptation and loss and damage now. But sadly, we know the political realities of all those things.
Yeah.
So yes, the COP is bringing first a very critical ingredient, if you'd like, to the forefront, which is nature, because nature is able to help with both mitigation and adaptation, right? And actually, it's the only, to my mind, real solution when you restore nature, when we go back to working with nature, right? When you look, and you mentioned this also, right? When we released all that fossil fuel, industrialization, that was what started tipping the balance. At the same time, there was a lot of the Earth's surface that changed. There was a lot of, nice green background that we have that got destroyed. The UK had temperate rainforests. How much of that is there now, right? So this kind of large-scale destruction in the developed country is also another contributor to this. So what I'm trying to say is bringing nature back up front, up center is indeed important. And this COP is actually doing, quite a good job in making that a key focal area. You mentioned the TFFF. It's good that that was actually launched last week, right? The Tropical Forest.
Tropical Forest Forever Facility, the TFF,
Unfortunately, at the last minute, the UK pulled out in terms of providing, their contribution, which they had promised all along, and they had been part of the, one of the countries that had been at the table designing this.
This facility.
Yeah.
I once again, I'm always aware that we have so little time to deal with this. In the remaining time, I'd like your take on sort of the structures and the systems and the kinds of ideas that have helped not just the public, but somewhat more importantly, the corporate world to come around to this. And so you will find things like the planetary boundaries, very, very public, put out there to help corporates to understand, how our economic activities, our human activities are actually either over using the resources, over extracting, overburdening supportive ecosystems. The 17 SDGs, I think these have had an enormous impact. There's no corporation now that when they think about their annual report and their sustainability report, do not take into account what their economic activities are vis-a-vis, these 17 SDGs. So I mean, these tools that help our understanding of how we both depend on these natural ecosystems, let's say the role of nature, and on the other hand, how our own activities impact them, either in terms of rates of extraction, changes in land use, disruption of ecosystem services, depletion of resources, not only that we need for our civilization, but that nature needs to actually restore and rejuvenate itself. Where do the gaps lie? Do we need another list of what is needed to deepen our understanding beyond this very superficial awareness level of the role that we as human civilization have to ensure our own survival as we think about how our activities impact the environment and vice versa. And this very core understanding that basically when we abuse some of these natural ecosystems, we are actually seeing this boomerang back on ourselves. Are we just not deploying these structures effectively, or are there really serious gaps in understanding that would actually help bring this to a very fundamental level for how we live our lives?
Okay, another big one, Gary. Not much time. Okay. But first off, of course, I think one thing is the corporate sector has actually become quite attuned and sort of understanding these dependencies and reliance, and it's great. I mean, like climate governance Malaysia, what you guys do is really remarkable. We've raised a lot of awareness amongst your members as well, and that is important because there are a lot of boards now that have more sensitivity towards this, right? Petronas had a very interesting workshop earlier this year on energy and nature, where they were defining how they are going to navigate their operations, transitioning into more of an energy company, but ensuring that nature is also not destroyed in the process, which was very honest, very and encouraging, and it's good to see these kind of discourses because no one person has the answers, but when we all sit together and start looking at the problems together and start offering solutions, I think that's where we can move forward. Now,
I just want to interrupt you just for a second to let you know that we do have a little bit of extra time, and so I'm glad that so you don't have to rush your final points. I need to let you know. So please feel free to move beyond the 8 o'clock, the 9 o'clock hour, as it were. Yeah.
How long do we have?
I'm going to take another 5 past, 7 past.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Yeah. So I mean, I'm just focusing on what's happening here in Malaysia, and I think it's very encouraging. Our local banks are taking the position that sustainability is not just a buzzword, nice to dance to when it's interesting across the globe, and when certain changes in appetite for it happens, you don't drop it like a hot potato. Here, it is serious, right? And it's great to hear that here and across the region as well. And I think these are very progressive attitudes to embrace, given how complex our global system is in terms of trading and so on. So it takes courage, but I think it's the kind of courage we need, and especially leadership from the corporate sector in doing the right thing. We have data, right? And data, I think, is something that has been pushing this awareness somewhat. We have, like you said, I mean, recently the NDC3s are supposed to be submitted for COP in time for COP30. There was a report that came out on the NDC synthesis report, and sadly, of course, no surprises here. But those commitments, I think at that point, at the end of September, 64 countries had provided their commitments, and analysis showed that we fall way short of what is needed. So we are, based on that, on a trajectory to a 2.5 to 2.8 degree world. As you know, last year we crossed that 1.5 degree mark again this year, and if we continue this way, to actually stabilize at 1.5 becomes more and more difficult. Right, Malaysia's NDC3 was submitted, just at the end of last month. So that was not included in this report, and I suppose other countries that submit subsequently, their NDCs are also not included in this report. I would say Malaysia has sort of continues to do our part. We are not the biggest emitter, but yet we have taken now an absolute target. So, we are reducing our emissions from the peaking level expected by 2030. So by 2035, between 15 to 30 million tons of CO2 equivalent is what we have pledged. That is a conditional and an unconditional element. So absolute emission reduction with conditional and unconditional, following that CBDR principle that you rightly mentioned earlier as well, Gary. So these data points and also our net zero, by 2050 goal, I think support cohesive action towards, meeting these targets. But these can't be done in isolation. And as we can see, and the thing that really, I think, also raises public awareness, unfortunately, is impacts. So we're seeing more and more impacts, like, now in the Philippines, Taiwan, as you mentioned, the typhoon Fung Wang is raging. And these are the things that, I remember in one COP, I think it was COP26 when they said 26, when they finally got the loss and damage fund going. It was because 1/3 of Pakistan was under floodwater, right? So it's these kind of things that finally make things happen, sadly. I mean, so I don't know, sometimes I wonder how smart the human being is really. But okay, that aside, we have things like you're asking about, what are the instruments? We have seen advances, the TCFD, Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, now the TNFD, on nature-related financial disclosure. And within Malaysia, Bank Negara, World Bank did this great study a few years ago, an exploration of nature-related financial risks. And they found about 54% of the, loans out there are dependent on nature functioning, right? Directly related. And conversely, more than close to 80%, I think, affect the functionality of nature. So I think it's this kind of, sort of grounded information that also supports some kind of transition. But is it fast enough? And, sometimes I think all these efforts are good and they're moving towards the right direction. But we also may need to do more in terms of, you mentioned planetary boundaries, you mentioned SDGs. SDGs, yes, there are loads and loads of, 17 goals, numerous targets. But one important target, which is not often mentioned, but it's gaining more traction and more momentum, is the very last target of the very last goal, right? Goal 17, target 19, on moving beyond GDP. And that, I think, gives a good recognition of what we talked about earlier as well, of how, in a way, society is built around this proprietary rights and, sort of competitiveness and, me first. If I win, somebody else has to lose. That kind of notion, right? It's trying to break that away, because that is not the idea of progress ultimately. And we see that constantly. We see that in the inequalities that people are increasingly facing. We see that in how the climate and biodiversity laws are all, compounding all of this. And so we need to really take the bull by the horns. Yes, and and look at what we need to do, and it's that reframing, right? That reframing that needs to happen, and the Pact for the Future that that was launched by the UN under the SDGs last year, they emphasize this, that beyond GDP kind of indicator is required, because ultimately, we do find ourselves dancing to this mantra of, oh, GDP grows, so that's good. And GDP drops by, 0.5%. Alarm bells. I don't know why, but alarm bells, right? Okay, that's not my field. But what I'm trying to say is a more nuanced, indicator is also something that's needed. And good news is in Malaysia, we are working on that. So next week, the Malaysian CSO SDG Alliance, so this is a plug for that, is having a workshop on continuing this discourse on beyond GDP that was started by the, civil society organizations, and with government, with, other partners as well, the UN and so on. So that is one important thing. What is it that we are measuring our progress against?
Yes.
Now, I'll just round this off by saying, a couple of days ago, the the Department of Statistics had our happiness index that was published, right? 2024 compared to, I think 2019 was the last time, which is good. And they found that most of us are really happy, generally, and and they broke it down according to the states, and most states are also apparently really happy, generally, or the happiness has increased, except for Kuala Lumpur and Labuan. All right, dropped, and and some of the commentary is, look, skyscrapers and malls do not make for a happy person. You need more than that. You need fulfillment. You need ability to connect. You don't want to be stuck in traffic jams. So these are qualitative things that also need to be captured, right? So I'm glad, DOSM and Malaysia is looking at our happiness index and publicizing that. But what can corporates do, right? I'm reading this book called Net Positive by Paul Pullman, the former CEO of Unilever. It's really fascinating. I would recommend it. It really illustrates how you can make profits as well as do the much bigger things of working within planetary boundaries, working for the benefit of people, right? Purpose. What is your purpose? Is it only pursuing profits, or is it purpose to serve? I think that is a question we all need to ask ourselves, and ask ourselves deeply, and whether what we are doing is actually serving people. Whose values are we building? Is it stakeholders, all the people that are around us, employees, your supply chain, the communities that depend on you, that could be depending on you? Or is it just one very narrow, and shareholders, or is it just a narrow shareholder value?
Shareholders,
right?
yeah.
And the last thing, of course, is what's the scale of time you're looking at? Is it long-term? That's what sustainability is about. Or is it just going to be measured in this quarterly way? So in that book, they say Unilever decided that they were going to do away with quarterly reporting and just, embrace a more long-term thing. And they had to do some convincing of their investors and their shareholders. But, long story short, in that 10 years, they said that, as their profits were declining, and they embraced this shift from the CEO. Ultimately, it brought value, in the traditional capitalistic sense, to the company as well. So I think these are the kind of examples that we need to embrace. These are the kind of conversations we need to have. These are the kind of approaches that we need to embrace, right? Where, I guess one very important point, and I think circling back to what COP is doing, is really trying to make this an inclusive COP, or COPs in general to become more inclusive. I remember back in the days when when I first went for COP in 2007, 2008, Gary, you were there too. Yeah. We had the negotiators and then people outside, and of course, more enlightened negotiators like yourself would always connect with, the civil society organizations, but not everybody did that, right? And but now it's a more inclusive setup. Even in Malaysia, we have a more inclusive setup as well, which is great to see. The progression here. We've always been pretty good with that, but more and more so. So again, with corporate community as well, I think we all have to sit together and deal with this beast.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I'm so grateful that you agreed to join us to kick this parallel COP event off for COP30, Lavanya. It's been a pleasure having you. I hope we can have you on again at some point. We barely scratched the surface on what I think was one of the most underreported, unreported events, which is basically Malaysia's change in our NDC, moving from an intensity-based target to an absolute target. For the first time, bringing in the concept of peaking, reintroducing the unconditional and conditional aspects. I mean, all of these things, and of course, this imperative to bring nature into everything. I hope that we'll have the chance.
Gary, I must add our
NDC, please.
Our NDC also really strongly emphasizes nature, which is great, both for mitigation and adaptation. I mean, there's very good language in there. So I think it's very...
Yeah. So once again, like I said, something that happens sort of because of ASEAN and everything. I mean, it's understandable. But I think we need to pull that up, shine light on it, and demonstrate that when people like yourself in civil society, raise awareness and key decision makers are able to listen to, as you said, broad and range of voices, an inclusive approach that only an inclusive approach can capture, then we can make this kind of, I think, remarkable progress. So once again, thank you so much for agreeing to help us at CGM kick off this support this parallel session of the COP. It's been an absolute joy having you on this conversation, and look forward to having you on again. Hopefully not too long from now. So with that, we end this session, and my pleasure to hand it back to Arun to take you to the next part of our parallel session, CGM, and our coverage of COP30. Thank you very much.
A big thank you to Dr. Gary and Ms. Lakhsmi for sharing such valuable insights and perspectives on the global outcomes of the COP30 and other perspectives that were very interesting equally. So, moving forward, we would now like to move on to the next session, which will be the C-Suite's highlight, which will be moderated by Mr. Karl Godderis, Chief Executive Officer of EUROCham, together with Iyer Dr. Serina Hijjas, Council Member of CGM. The floor is yours for the both of you.
Thank you very much, Arun, and also thank you very much, CGM, for having me in this session this morning. For those who just dial in, so as part of this parallel COP initiative by CGM, every morning we will have a conversation with a Malaysia-based business leader from different sectors and different backgrounds, and we are kicking off this process this morning with nobody less but Miss Serina Hijjas, who is rightfully the green champion among the architect and urban planning community in Malaysia. Welcome, Serina, to this discussion.
Thank you very much, Karl. Great pleasure to be here, and following up after Lavanya from WWF is a little bit difficult, and Dr. Gary, but we'll try our best to give a sort of, C-suite corporate view in terms of this. Instead of moving from safeguarding of nature or ecosystems, we're now moving to saving the ecosystem in this topic that we're going to cover. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Indeed, the bar is high, but let's give it our best. And as you just said, so the topic of this discussion, and every day has a different topic, but today the topic is ecosystems in a broad sense, but then more particularly how it relates to corporate biodiversity strategies, nature positive investments, and landscape restoration partnerships. Now, we often speak about sustainability as a compliance journey, but your work suggests something different. It suggests that sustainability is a design of belonging, notably seeking to balance the relationship between people, place, culture, ecology, and environment. So to start our conversation, I want to take a personal step back with you and ask you, growing up, how were you exposed to nature and the environment? And how do you feel this has impacted how later in life you feel responsible towards younger generations, and also how you've handled sustainability topics in your business decisions?
Well, I guess I grew up in an environment of parents where one builds and another grows. But if you take the point of view of my mother, it'll be the one that builds demolishes the one that grows. So, we often had this debate at home between a life of an architect, my father, and a life of a naturalist, my mother, who later is cultivating now endangered trees and at a level 1 of an arboretum at home. It sets a kind of high standard, I guess. These were my parents, and I guess I moved into, I didn't choose sustainability in architecture. It was just my first job. So maybe sustainability in architecture chose me. And for a long time now, I've been working and advocating since the very time I left university and started in my journey of architecture in the built environment. Maybe it started in energy efficiency, technology, daylight as a free energy, transparency. And then it moved more into the consciousness of environment with inclusion of more greenery and biodiversity. I think my generation was very science and technology driven. Every generation is in pursuit of some form of innovation, but I guess now more the repairing and responding to planet's ecological imbalance has become innovation in a different way. We are trying to repair some of the works of industrialization to where we are now here, and I'm seeing more and more youth involved in this and actually coming up with the solutions in repairing and responding to this imbalance. Yeah, so that's pretty exciting for me.
Okay, thank you. I was also asking a bit of a reference to your personal exposure to nature as a run-up to the next topic, because urbanization is obviously a strong phenomena, and particularly when we talk about ecosystems, we talk about ecosystems in cities as a climate adaptation mechanism for sustainable development. Now, in architecture and urban planning, and we often start with land use maps and grid lines and zoning. However, ecosystems in the true sense, they don't necessarily recognize and respect those lines. So if you were to flip the hierarchy and say we start with ecosystems first, how do you think city making would look differently?
In the past, we've been engaging with some of the cities, CGM as well, on a macro level in terms of, I think there's a difference between new cities and old cities. New cities can plan now and should be planning now with a different response to ecology. And ecosystems. I'll call it the green infrastructure, shall we just say. We've been very focused about gray infrastructure due to mobility, connections, land, and at the expense, of course, of green ecosystems. So we're fundamentally looking at city making processes or city repairing processes, in this case, like Kuala Lumpur, Johor, or Penang. We would look more in terms of integration, regeneration, and coexistence, and increasing the green lung that we have basically taken out. So we would be guided by natural flows, topography, ecological boundaries, and the services provided by local ecosystems, leading to more resilient solutions, I would say, more livable urban environments. Today, we're still building with 10% urban biodiversity in our landscape, and where we should be shifting to at least 30 to 50 is something that I've been trying to advocate both in municipalities and other levels to increase the amount of greenscape or greenery into our urban environment as solutions to both heat island and drainage, to closer to about 30%, at least, at the very minimum. Yeah.
Okay. Now you said Malaysia should aim higher. But what do you think will come out of the COP conference in terms of decisions around ecosystems, and how should Malaysia then adopt to this?
I think there are, I mean, we talked a little bit offline on this about our carbon or low carbon cities. I mean, there's two parts to this discussion, which is one, the effects in cities, and the other one is our forests. So I didn't know that Malaysia had its own system in terms of ecological fiscal transfer, what's called EFT. And we're discussing now the TFFF, the Tropical Forest Forever Facility at COP. But Malaysia has an EFT and was involved actually in the TFF itself. But in the Malaysian context, basically was providing funding for conservation works of our forests. And I think it started in 2019 and up to date, I think we're actually putting as much as about 800 million under NRES. I believe that the TFFC will have some impact to how we're going to manage our EFT, whether we're going to be involved in putting some money towards the TFFF, which, as you know, Indonesia, Sweden, and Brazil have actually put in, whether we'll be putting it through this mechanism to do our conservation work that we are already commenced on. That's another thing. In the cities, the low carbon frameworks have now been settled into the major big cities. And they are looking at more tree planting, development of services in terms of increasing the green footprint, but perhaps still not at a very aggressive manner that it needs to be.
Yeah. Maybe let's bring this also then, because we spoke about Malaysia as a country, but to the corporate level, and talk a bit about corporate biodiversity strategies, which is probably a bit of an abstract term for many organizations. And we see often very bold sustainability statements, but there's very few biodiversity on balance sheets of companies. So what would be for you a meaningful corporate biodiversity strategy? What could be measurable, and what would you say should be the minimum bar in Malaysia in that respect?
I think recently one of the big corporations that is involved in developments has made some urban biodiversity commitments, mentioning things like zero primary rainforest removal policies in their developments. Obviously, this needs to be measured, I think, against changing plantations to developments, because plantations aren't seen as primary rainforest removal, but we're seeing conversion of plantations to developments, housing estates, etc., etc. So what we would like to see is more of a commitment to the percentage of regenerating back pocket forests and considerations in that case. The other one is that we're seeing also this tree for tree replacement policy that's coming in, implementing policies to replace trees removed, hopefully with more stringent version of 100% green replacement. It's like Singapore has moved into, and targeted tree planting. So we're seeing the big boys, the bigger developments, the big corporates, essentially starting to make some firm commitments, which is good to see. This is a nice transition from not speaking about it too much, but now making some commitments. But most of them are also looking at the net zero pledge at a much broader commitment stage of carbon emissions by 2050, which complements its biodiversity effects by ensuring some climate resilience. But this should probably be broken down to more bite sizes, the 5-year scalable targets, because I think if we're thinking 20 years ago, we talked about 2020 when we had Mahathir in place. 2020 went and came. We talk about 2030. I think that we really we can't afford to look so far ahead. We really should be making 5 years commitments that are scalable and that we can actually see and measure better, I think.
Yeah. Now, you just said some companies, big companies, are making progress. From where I come with our company organization, I still feel that the carbon debate is heavily overshadowing the biodiversity discussion among companies. And in essence, most organizations are focused just on green energy and Scope 1 and Scope 2 type initiatives to lower carbon. But from your own profession, do you see that when you discuss with companies about development for new office buildings and so forth, that biodiversity is starting to really enter that conversation, or is it still more the low carbon type discussion that you have in these discussions?
Still the low carbon, still on operational carbon, not including embodied carbon, and very few on, except at the scale of maybe master plans, a few are talking about biodiversity. Yeah. So Malaysia works with a sort of stick and carrot, but stick first to make bigger shifts, I think, that we would really prefer to see. And all of them are waiting to see if there are incentives connected to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because now the COP conference is, of course, heavily focused on biodiversity from various angles. So what kind of communication would you like to see after the conference towards, say, companies to make sure that biodiversity gets a higher focus on their agendas? Is there a certain message missing now that you hope to see appear after this COP conference?
I think there's enough there to build upon for us, as you have seen already, that we've already started on an EFT journey. But if we're talking about in the cities, I think that the mind change to include more urban greenery and transform our city needs to come really from government and from from city municipalities before developers, shall we just say, or big corporations will actually adopt it at a much bigger scale. There's always this idea that it's a lot more money. I give this recent information after talking with the Timber Association, Malaysia Timber. It's that PEFC timber is actually the same price as normal timber to purchase and to make things. And what's the biggest thing that we create in the building industry? Doors. Yet none of the doors, or only a few doors, will make PEFC doors on request. And I found that quite astounding. I always imagine it's more expensive because that's what my developers and, talking to them would say. It's just more expensive. And I talk to the production, it's more expensive. But my understanding now is that to get the license, it's actually, there's an incentive from the government. They actually pay for your licenses. So what's the hindrance here? And that is, I think, the knowledge that you can do good with no impact to your ROI. The idea is that if I'm going to do more greenery, except for housing developments and master plans where they're seeing the value of the selling price going up a bit more, in terms of providing more waterways, greenways, sponge city sort of concept in their planning, and they're seeing that the prices go up with that. I think the first idea here is still ROI, return of investment, and not return of nature in that way, the ROI of nature. But if we're going to have a value now that the TFFF is going to give per hectare or whatever, perhaps then that value will trickle into corporations, that there is a financial component to this. I think it's a sad story, but that perhaps is the first movement.
Yeah. Although you sound a bit skeptical about that, Akum. So
I am optimistic that we are making some better strides. Just like all of us who've been in this industry, it's probably not accelerating fast enough, probably.
Okay. So maybe an element to accelerate is Malaysia's positioning recently as the president of ASEAN for a year, which brings me to our next topic about nature positive investments, where you see now global capital moving slowly, be it from mitigation and less harm towards restoration and regeneration. But given the commitments and the ambitions that were expressed at the end, particularly of the ASEAN Summit series, what do you think it would take for Malaysia to become a nature positive investment hub in ASEAN? Is that a matter of incentives, regulatory clarity, courage, or just leadership, will, and then execute?
Regulatory and leadership. I think that would be right at the top first. Regulatory clarity trickling down to the state levels and then buying into that as well. I think the investor courage, I think they are working ways in terms of adaptation, resilience in finding investments out. There's a lot more discussion about it and availability of it, which is nice. Some say it's green sukuk, some say, it's other components. But leadership and clarity of regulatory governance at state levels, I think it's going to be quite imperative to push. Yeah. I'm glad to hear on the NDA. I know it came out at the end of October. Glad to hear from Lavanya that there's a lot more ecosystem services inside there, which is a good thing. Yeah, I think that's good to also push.
Yeah, and are there any particular nature positive projects in Malaysia you can talk a bit about? Also, remembering our conversation where you brought up the biodiversity strategy that Sarawak has developed. Maybe that is also linked to that. Is there something you could add here?
Yeah, I think UNDP has been working quite hard with Semenanjung, Malaysia, and they are now advisors on the biodiversity framework, which you can see that the Premier of Sarawak is quite invested in it. I think they're very forward thinking, and they do know the value of the biodiversity they have. So I think this has been quite a nice shift. You asked about which nature positive project, and I had to really think about it for a bit. And there are some new master plans coming up with that idea, although again, it's always this, how much do we do at the beginning and wait for the return of investment on these nature positive projects? Because it's perhaps a little bit longer. But maybe because something like Putrajaya was always a pioneer green city, we have 38% of area developed into parks, lakes, wetlands. It has actually the largest constructed freshwater wetland in Southeast Asia. So I would say that comes closer to being a nature positive project. And certainly in terms of their mobility, going into gas and all the rest of it, even before other cities, and then now into electrification. So working quite holistically, looking at solutions to make a much more nature positive project. I think probably Putrajaya. Smaller ones like Think Cities adaptation, I'm not sure the impact of the scale of it to Penang itself, but certainly that's another good example. And I believe the first sponge city concept Think City is working on at the moment for Selangor State. This would be a great shift because we've been trying to get more sponge city concepts into the other smaller states. And there's a bit of a pushback with regards to measurable drainage systems, not recognizing that nature can be a measurable based drainage system apart from heat island. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Now brings me to our last topic of landscape restoration partnerships, which by the sheer meaning of the word partnership seems to indicate that we need to shift from corporate action to more a collective type of coalition, if only because ecosystems, they cross land titles, rivers cross borders, and of course wildlife does so as well. So I have a question here, which is also a bit triggered by, in our member organization, feedback we get, and this is only on the level of implementing green energy, where companies say, well, there's so many partners, we have parties we have to talk to make this happen. So here, therefore, for landscape restoration, the big question is, who must partner with whom, right? Considering that geographic complexity. And what do you see in Malaysia as a minimum coalition to make some of these projects take off?
I think that some of the states that are a bit more mature and with a bit more new generation blood coming in to those states are taking some lead with making commitments or making conservation strives in their states. Perhaps some in Pahang and Perak, namely those, but not just those, are taking a sort of leadership role and then bringing it down to the state level where they, so heads of states are bringing it down to state level. And then I see, for example, like the ecosystem for services for tigers, for example, as a project that needed a whole of society approach, but, from the people that manage the conservation, but getting funding for that also. At the moment, it's in the form of sort of grants and all the rest of it, but I'm hoping with the TFFF that this value chain basically moves. So, yeah, I think rivers jurisdiction, I have heard of many issues with regards, we talk about land, but we're not talking about sea. And just to push conservation of certain areas and the benefits of it, in terms of even fishing, there are too many parties, too many vested there. So it really has to come down at a state level to cut across these invested or vested interests. And then for those who are in that area, for example, we talked about Petronas earlier in the talk, if they see that there is an opportunity where they can make better certain areas, they would be the ones that we will go into getting the investments to protect and conserve. So I think this private and government relationship is quite important. One to fund it and one to govern it, and then the watchdogs that actually weigh in on the level of conservation that we're doing or protection of saving our ecosystems. Yeah.
Well, as a final question, because throughout our discussion, you mentioned that the key levers for making progress on all these ecosystem-related topics come down to political goodwill, government using the right sticks, and an expanded view on return on investment by companies. So given that, what do you expect from this COP conference as an outcome, and particularly an outcome towards changing some of the mechanisms we need to make progress?
I'm hoping from this COP that financial institutions will see the benefit and the return of investment in nature. I'm looking that the pledge of financial commitment is effective. But even if they're not as effective, then our ecological fiscal transfer is basically learning from some of the gates that TFFF have done, satellite monitoring, because as we have heard, we're making big pledges to rare earth. And rare earth comes from certain forest location. We keep talking about the 54%, the 51%, the 52%, but we have to remember that not all of that is actual reserved land. There are also private land that is calculated into that. And so if we wanted to keep that, we are actually looking at buying back some of those land banks. If we think that the 50%, being above the 50% threshold is important. So I think these are the certain things I hope that the TFF facility mechanisms will be cut across to our EFT component in the bigger picture of the forests in the cities and the greening of the cities. There's a lot of convincing to change. I know they're making low carbon cities commitments and some nature-based ones as well, but actually giving us qualitative performance numbers is a bit challenging. Yeah.
Okay, but still, it sounds to me that for you the glass is half full. Serina, it was a true pleasure to talk to you this morning. I believe our time is up. So many thanks again for your very valuable inputs, and have a lovely day. And to the rest of you, enjoy the rest of this event. Goodbye.
Yes. Thank you.
Back to you, Ram. Yeah.
So thank you, Mr. Karl and Dr. Serina, for the insightful discussion that took place. So now, moving forward, we would like to move on to the next section, which is the NGO Pavilion by WWF. Today's keynote speaker is Ms. Angela Consuelo Ibay, Senior Program Officer and Head of the Climate Change and Energy Program at WWF-Philippines. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Angela.
Hello. Yes. Good morning, delegates, colleagues, and friends, and thank you to NICERS for the kind invitation for me to speak to you during this session. And my session will actually talk about safeguarding our ecosystems and building resilience through nature. We gather today under a very shared truth that our ecosystems are the foundation of life, our economies, our cultures, and our collective resilience. They are very much under unprecedented pressure. Across ASEAN, we are witnessing everywhere record heat waves and rising seas, haze that blankets our skies from fires, mangroves cleared for development, and rivers choked with waste. Even our coral reefs in the Coral Triangle are flooded. They can store themselves and feeding thermal stress. We also have destructives that continue to wreak havoc in ecosystems, with floods and droughts also happening in many parts of Southeast Asia. Disrupt food systems that have sustained communities across centuries, and reminding us that the degraded ecosystems and landscapes, in fact, magnify disasters. These are not isolated events. They are symptoms of a system under strain. And yet, amid the urgency lies hope and our greatest opportunity to inherit and rebuild our societies and economies in partnership with nature. We are also in a region of resilience and renewal. ASEAN holds some of the richest biodiversity on Earth, home to 20% of the planet's plants and animal species, and 15% of its tropical forests. And our people have an enduring relationship with nature. The challenge for us is how to turn heritage into leadership. As we look forward to COP30 in Belém, the question before ASEAN is not whether we can afford to protect our ecosystems, but whether we can afford not to. So our task is clear: to safeguard our ecosystems, not only for nature's sake, but for our own survival. And the challenge before us and the opportunity is to make COP30 in Belém a turning point where ASEAN redefines leadership in ecosystem stewardship. Because we know that when we restore nature, we're restoring our future. But this is without challenges, and we know that there are challenges that we will face. Several of them include fragmented governance. We have policies on biodiversity, water, forest, land use, and climate, which are often operating in silos, leading to missed synergies and competing priorities. We also have ecosystem degradation, We know that over half of ASEAN's wetlands, forests, and even coral reefs are already degraded or under serious threat. And deforestation, mining, and overfishing are continuing to threaten livelihoods. Further, rapid urbanization, as well as the dominance of great infrastructure and land conversion, continues to happen. Many of our cities are expanding without necessarily integrating green design and sustainability principles, and thereby in the process increasing flood risk and heat stress. Further, we know that Southeast Asia is losing almost 1.2 million hectares of forests annually. And with the urban growth, this comes at the expense of our wetlands, mangroves, and biodiversity. We also have to contend with the financing gap. Less than 10% of global climate finance is actually allocated to nature-based solutions, despite the fact of its proven effectiveness. And country budgets are not sufficient. And lastly, of course, ASEAN countries are facing escalating climate vulnerability and the damages caused by that. We have an estimated over 210 billion annually by 2030 of damages if our ecosystems continue to decline. Because we know our ecosystems are among the most climate exposed globally. We have typhoons, heat waves, and sea level rise, which threaten lives and livelihoods. And further, they compound ecosystem loss, reducing natural resilience. But despite these, we do have a lot of opportunities. Nature-based solutions, by implementing them, they are restoring mangroves, forests, and peatlands, thereby enhancing resilience while capturing carbon, offering us triple wins: climate mitigation, adaptation, and biodiversity recovery. In relation to nature-based solutions, if we integrate it into our infrastructure planning, we actually have sustainable infrastructure, which can include urban forests, green belts, and they can create safer, cooler, and more livable cities. Further, we have circular economy models wherein we're turning waste into value, reducing pressure into on our natural resources. And in terms of finance, if we include green finance in innovation, there are actually innovative funding mechanisms already emerging. Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia are pioneering biodiversity credits and green sukuk, and nature-positive infrastructure funds are also emerging. We can add to digital and indigenous knowledge fusion and community-led models. By empowering indigenous and local communities, we're actually ensuring sustainability and equity. And by using AI and remote sensing alongside traditional ecological wisdom, this can actually manage resources more sustainably. Lastly, of course, let us capitalize on regional cooperation. The ASEAN Working Group on Climate Change and Biodiversity can lead joint ecosystem restoration targets, which are aligned with COP30 as well as the Global Biodiversity Framework. And ASEAN's framework on circular economy and the Declaration on Environmental Sustainability can provide platforms for scaling up nature-based solutions. So the message is clear. Nature is not a victim. It's actually a potential and very powerful ally. Nature is not a constraint to development. It is the foundation of it. We can look to inspiration on ongoing efforts across the region, which shows that restoration and protection are not abstract ideals, but they are actually working. For example, in Malaysia, we have nature-based solutions for flood risk resilience, since Malaysia has faced devastating floods in recent years. And in response, the Klang River Rehabilitation Project integrates nature-based solutions with sustainable urban drainage, resulting in reforestation of riverbanks, wetland restoration, and floodplains, which has reduced peak flooding by up to 30%. So investing in natural buffers is actually more cost-effective than rebuilding after a disaster. Similarly, community-led conservation blends ecotourism in the city wetlands, wherein you can show how nature and livelihoods can thrive together. Thereby, because we are empowering local stewardship and the participation of stakeholders to ensure long-term sustainability. In the Philippines, we have mangrove resilience, restoration for resilience. In the provinces of Leyte and Samar, coastal communities have actually restored over 1,500 hectares of mangrove after Super Typhoon Haiyan. This has resulted in reduced storm surge impacts by as much as 50%. Has improved fishery productivity and created eco-livelihoods for many groups there, especially women's groups. So the lesson here is when restoration is community-led, ecosystems actually thrive, and so do the people. In Indonesia, we have the Peatland Restoration Agency, which has rehabilitated millions of hectares through rewetting, replanting, and of course, local fire brigades, resulting in a 40% drop in forest fire incidents since 2019. So the lesson is that strong policy coordination can turn crisis into recovery, and that it can also show that large-scale nature-based solutions can be viable and impactful. And of course, Singapore, which is a city in nature, providing that vision, wherein Singapore is now weaving biodiversity corridors into its urban fabric, integrating rain gardens and retention ponds into the cityscape, thereby showing that urban biodiversity and public health can have co-benefits, inspiring many cities across ASEAN. Because we know now that urban development and ecosystem conservation need not be at odds. They can reinforce each other, and cities can actually coexist and even flourish with nature. So across ASEAN, we're learning that when nature is part of the design, resilience is an inherent outcome. And these examples really demonstrate that ASEAN possesses the ingenuity, capacity, and commitment to safeguard our ecosystems. And ASEAN is not waiting for solutions from elsewhere. We're actually creating it here. So in order to scale up these efforts, I think there are some recommendations that we can find and therefore align with COP30's call for enhanced ambition. ASEAN can pursue these strategic steps. One, we can integrate ecosystem protection in our nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, as well as other national and regional policies and climate plans. In here, we can embed nature-based solutions in our updated NDCs and NAPs. Also, embed nature-based solutions in urban design, codes, and infrastructure investments. We can also promote ecosystem accounting as part of our national development indicators, and perhaps develop regional ecosystem health indicators under the ASEAN Climate Change Strategic Action Plan. In terms of green finance, why not mobilize green and blue finance for nature positive work? We can expand on ASEAN's green and blue bond standards to explicitly support ecosystem restoration projects and nature-based solutions, and as well as also sustainable infrastructure. We can encourage public and private partnership in restoration, and maybe look towards leveraging carbon and biodiversity credits with integrity and transparency while ensuring community benefits. And maybe we can also establish an ASEAN green and blue finance facility, which would channel climate funds into mangroves, seagrasses, and forest restoration. Third step we could, as ASEAN, is to empower local and indigenous leadership. Let us recognize indigenous and community-managed forests as natural infrastructure, providing flood control, water regulation, and carbon storage. In the process, let us support indigenous peoples, fisher folks, and farmers as stewards of ecosystems through tenure security and inclusive decision-making, as well as looking at access to financing for these community-managed forests and fisheries. Thereby, we should also support community enterprises in mangroves, seagrasses, and wetland restoration. And maybe institutionalize knowledge exchange platforms across ASEAN for indigenous and scientific collaboration, and also foster regional learning networks to share data, methods, as well as monitoring tools. And therefore, lastly, look at strengthening regional cooperation and knowledge exchange. Perhaps we can look to launch a ASEAN ecosystem restoration initiative by 2030 with measurable targets for restoration, coral protection, and wetland recovery. And maybe an ASEAN Center for Nature-Based Solutions linked to also the other ASEAN centers to share data, research, and design standards. All of them aligning with the Global Biodiversity Framework and the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. Really, the ASEAN's greatest strength lies in collective action, and our ecosystems connect us beyond borders. So let us move from isolated projects to interconnected systems, where every investment strengthens both nature and the society. So lastly, as the world is now convening in Belém for COP30, I hope that ASEAN arrives united and ambitious, bringing the spirit of ASEAN, a spirit of resilience, partnership, and hope, and carrying the message that protecting ecosystems is our pathway to resilience and prosperity. Because our ecosystems are not passive victims, they are active solutions to it. So let us champion nature-based solutions to be as central to both climate action and development, and double investments in them across the region. Let us commit to reversing ecosystem loss by 2030, not merely slowing it down, and in the process restoring at least 30% of degraded ecosystems aligned with global targets. Let us also ensure all ASEAN NDCs integrate measurable ecosystem outcomes. Only 6 ASEAN countries have already submitted their updated NDCs, and encourage everyone to do so. Let us build regional solidarity for a just nature positive transition, while ensuring local and indigenous leadership in ecosystem restoration and planning. And let us speak with one voice in Belém, that safeguarding our ecosystems is safeguarding our economies, our food, our water, our future. Because when ASEAN leads with unity and conviction, we know that the world listens. So from the mangrove coasts of Malaysia to the rainforests of Kalimantan, to the coral reefs of the Philippines and the Mekong Delta, as well as cities of Singapore and across the region, our region really holds the blueprint for resilience. So for today, let us pledge to protect our forests as lungs of our region, to restore our wetlands as shields against storms, to nurture our coral reefs as sources of life and livelihood, and to ensure that every child in ASEAN inherits not only prosperity, but a thriving planet. Because together, we can make COP30 a turning point, from ambition to action, from depletion to regeneration, from crisis to collective renewal. And when ASEAN stands together, we can turn biodiversity into resilience and restoration into growth. So let this be our legacy for COP30 and beyond. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Angela, for sharing your insights with us from WWF-Philippines. And with that, I would like to conclude today's program. Thank you all for joining us on the first day of the Malaysian Support for COP30 event. We hope you enjoyed the sessions and the discussions. Do stay tuned for our upcoming sessions from November 11 to November 21st. Do stay tuned for our upcoming where we'll continue exploring a diverse range of climate themes, which are all listed on the CGM website. Don't miss out on day 2, which is themed Adaptation and Action, taking place at the same time tomorrow. The recording of today's session will be available soon, and if you have friends or colleagues who would like to join, registrations are still open. We look forward to seeing you again tomorrow.